Okay. Michael, nice to meet you. Let me just unmute you. Okay, you're unmuted. Nice to meet you, Michael.
Nice to see you again.
Thank you. And Dr. Bredesen, thank you so much for coming back again to speak with us. We are very grateful for someone who does the amount of research you do to share it with us so freely. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen.
Let me start by asking Dr. Bredesen, how unique is your information? Are you a specialist who is one of very few people that is aware of this information, or is this now standard information that lots of people in your field are aware of?
Yeah, that's a great point. So we were the first, after 30 years in the lab and publishing 230 papers from my laboratory group, we were the first to publish the reversal of cognitive decline in patients with Alzheimer's. That was published in 2014. We published additional cases in 2016. We published 100 cases in 2018, and then we published the first trial in 2022 in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease. There has been, as you can imagine, there's still ongoing controversy because people are trying different things. So there are, for example, drug trials being published, but it's important to point out that the drug trials have shown not an improvement in people's cognition, not a stabilization in cognition, but rather when they go downhill a little more slowly. In one case, it was 22%. In one case, it was 27%. In one case, it was 36%. So all we're talking about with the trials is just a slight slowing. In our case, we actually made people better, and we have people that have sustained their improvement now for over a decade. So quite different. But you're right, this is not accepted by everyone yet. And although we've trained over 2,000 physicians in 10 different countries and all over the US, we are now starting a larger trial, which is a randomized controlled trial at 6 different sites. This is Hollywood, Florida, Nashville, Tennessee, Cleveland, Ohio, Sacramento, California, Oakland, California, and Marin County, California, just north of San Francisco. So we'll have a lot more data in the upcoming year and a half or so. But there is, as you know, there is an ongoing controversy about drugs versus precision medicine protocols.
Just quickly, before I go into other things, an article came out a week or 2 or 3 ago about a new drug for Alzheimer's that got approved. You want to just quickly comment on that?
So the new ones haven't been approved yet. They have been they have gotten what's called accelerated approval. So it's essentially partial approval while they're looking for complete approval. And I'm assuming you're referring to donanemab that came out from Lilly. So the 2 most recent are lecanemab, also called Leqembi, and that's from Biogen, and then donanemab, which is coming out from Lilly. And that's the one that showed about a 36% slowing. So my argument is that, look, although they've called this a breakthrough, if Elon Musk told you that SpaceX, everybody dies, the rockets explode every time, but in a big breakthrough, the rockets explode 36% later, that really you wouldn't consider that to be a huge breakthrough. We want to see people actually get better and stay better.
Michael, you wrote a book, and it's a fantastic title. You guys are geniuses for using this title, Prevent Alzheimer's in Just 10 Minutes a Day. But aside from it being a catchy title, how much is that realistic? Because I'm very interested in preventing Alzheimer's in just 10 minutes a day. How do you prevent Alzheimer's in just 10 minutes a day?
Well, thanks for the question. Yeah, you can thank Jack Canfield for that title. It's kind of a retitle of the book. But basically the idea is that when we're looking at something like manual medicine, which is very complementary to other approaches, what we're looking at is a way that we can take the system and increase the fluid flow of cerebrospinal fluid, which is kind of the basis of cranial psychotherapy. And the idea when we say prevent Alzheimer's in just 10 minutes a day is that if somebody is not afflicted with that diagnosis right at the moment, if we can actually apply something like a very simple technique, which I can go into more detail about if you like, called the still point, which only takes about 5 to 10 minutes a day to do. And then there's a complementary technique called cranial pumping. that can actually put people in a situation where they have more enhanced fluid flow and they're less likely to encounter the effects of the disease, which over time, over decades, can be cumulative. So that's why we kind of use that title to kind of catch people's imagination to say, hey, there's something we can do to change the trajectory of Alzheimer's disease initially and keep people in a point where they don't develop more aggravated symptoms as they go along.
And the still point and the cranial pumping, could we do at home by ourselves?
Yeah, once somebody listens. I even have a virtual class to teach this. So it takes a day or two for someone to kind of palpate what's called the cranial sacral rhythm. There's oscillations in the body all the time. You know, there's cardiac rhythm, there's respiratory rhythm, there's other oscillations in the body. And my mentor, Dr. John Upledger, years ago at Michigan State University, developed a protocol for saying, yeah, there's something that we can do to actually listen to this fundamental rhythm in the body. And this rhythm that actually is developed on osteopathy from A.T. Still in the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s, and then some of his mentors like Sutherland, basically the idea is that when people palpate this rhythm, it's underlying the neuroskeletal muscular system. And when people start to palpate that and start to release, then they actually shift the whole structure of the body. And the whole kind of thesis of osteopathy is structure and function, that even if you can change something on a structural level, even very minutely, on a very fine level, it can actually cause a change. So it's very natural medicine. And even back in 1885, when the first school of osteopathic medicine was founded in Kirksville, Missouri, they had the theory, the old-time osteopaths, that the body had its own natural pharmacy. And if you could recruit that inner wisdom of the body and as if wake it up, the body could find a way to heal itself. So that's kind of the foundation that Dr. Upledger built on, and he's trained, you know, tens of thousands of therapists in the last 30 years on that basis.
So how exactly do we learn still point and cranial pumping? Is there a video on YouTube? Like, where do we learn how to do this?
It's a 2-day training that I have for people. We have been teaching in person for the longest time. You know, we've trained tens of thousands of people, but since the pandemic, as many people did, we've adopted a video where people can learn at home, work on themselves, and then work on their loved ones as well. So it's a procedure where you learn the palpation, takes time. It's like what I'm teaching this weekend. It's a 2-day class. And when people have enough repetition and they get silent enough to listen, then they can hear it. Just like a doctor can be trained to palpate and listen to the cardiac rhythm and the respiratory. This is a little more subtle. It's a little quieter, but anyone can do it. They just can maintain a bit of stillness, if you will, and trust their brain, their right brain, and then they can begin to listen to that and see it, even if they haven't had any advanced medical training.
So you feel confident that if we took your 2-day training, even if we have no special skills, that we'll be able to learn this and then do it every day?
Yeah, and we have a support system where if somebody's struggling a little bit, we can come back and support you as well. That's key.
Yeah. Great. Okay, Dr. Bredesen, every single person right now has got a pen in their hands. They've got a piece of paper. They've listed 1 through 10 on their paper, and they are waiting to hear you say exactly, step by step, what do we do to prevent getting Alzheimer's? Assume we're going to listen to you. We're motivated. We're ready. What are the, step by step, the most powerful possible things that we could do from all your research if we are very committed to preventing getting dementia or Alzheimer's?
Yeah, great point. So let me start by saying, with everything that we now know and have published over the last 10 years, Alzheimer's is now optional. And I know that sounds crazy, but we've published it. We've seen it again and again. So here's the thing. The critical piece is do not wait. Just as we all know, we don't wait to get advanced cancer. If we turn 50, we get a colonoscopy. Very similarly, anyone over 40 should get a cognoscopy. It's easy to do. It's some blood tests that are looking at what actually drives cognitive decline. Second thing, it's a simple online screening. So it's just looking at your cognition. It takes about 20 or 30 minutes. And then thirdly, and only if you're having symptoms already, or if you're doing poorly on the tests, you should also have an MRI with volumetrics. So in other words, looking at the regions of your brain and if there's any atrophy in any of those. Then what you're going to do to prevent it, it depends on what you find in those studies. And so think about it this way. Two major points here. Number one, what drives Alzheimer's? Two major things: inflammation and reduction in energetics. So we say Alzheimer's equals IA over E. That is to say, immune activation divided by energetics. So anything that's increasing your immune activation, and that can be poor dentition, it can be herpes simplex, it can be leaky gut, it can be an unknown infection like Lyme disease, it can be exposure to mold and mycotoxins, any of those things. And then anything that reduces the energy support for your brain. And this is why I think the idea of, craniosacral, yes, this is part of keeping your brain supported. Fantastic. Anything that helps with better outcomes. So when it comes to energetics, we're talking about four things: blood flow to your brain. We're talking about oxygenation. So people who have sleep apnea, they have increased risk. We're talking about mitochondrial function, and we're talking about ketone level. The ketones actually provide, just as you should be able to go back and forth between glucose and ketones. So when you say the 10 things, the main thing you want to do is get a cognoscopy and find out where you stand, because for some people, it will mean healing a leaky gut. For some people, it will mean improving your oral microbiome. For some people, it will mean removing the source of inflammation, such as exposure to mycotoxins. For many people, it will actually mean to get better oxygenation while you're sleeping. So let me point out that there are 4 stages you go through. And right now, virtually all medicine is focused on the last 2, when everybody should be focused on the first 2. So the first stage, when you're developing Alzheimer's, the first stage, you're asymptomatic. You don't know you have it. You can already, this happens to people often in their 30s and early 40s. You can see it on a PET scan. There are new blood tests now. So that's a fantastic advance. You'll be able to see, am I headed for this problem, which gives you even a leg up to start even earlier. Second phase is called SCI, subjective cognitive impairment. The good news is that lasts about 10 years. During that time, you can still score normally on cognitive testing, but you already know that things aren't what they were. You may have trouble remembering phone numbers. You may have trouble remembering faces, names, things like that. Don't wait. We've always been told there's nothing you can do about it, so don't come in. Nothing could be further from the truth. There's a lot we can do about it. And we see virtually everybody with SCI, we can reverse 100%. They do great. The third phase now, so this is a relatively late stage, is called mild cognitive impairment. And that's an unfortunate term, mild cognitive impairment. What it should be called is relatively late stage Alzheimer's disease, because it's like telling someone, don't worry, you only have mildly metastatic cancer. It's a relatively late stage. But even in our trial, 84% of those people actually improved. And then the fourth and final stage is the dementia stage. And by definition, that means that you're now having troubles with the activities of daily living, paying your bills, driving yourself around, toileting, showering, grooming, all that sort of basic stuff. So please don't wait until that time. Please come in the beginning here. Either get on active prevention when you turn 40 to 45, or if you start having just the beginnings, subjective cognitive impairment, please get evaluated, please get on active treatment. And that'll be a little bit different for each person, but it will involve those 2 major things. It'll involve inflammation and what's actually causing the inflammation, getting rid of that. And it'll involve improving your energetics, making sure you don't have sleep apnea, making sure your mitochondria are functioning well, making sure that you've got enough blood flow and oxygenation. For many people, it'll be doing things like EWOT, exercise with oxygen therapy, where you're actually getting improved blood flow and improved oxygenation. So again, the take-home lesson here is virtually nobody should get this disease if you simply don't wait.
Okay, so let's assume that someone goes to the gets these tests, and you say, not so great. It looks like you got all kinds of problems.
Yeah.
You got lots of inflammation. You got lots of oxygenation issues.
Yeah.
And now, in there to say there's a lot of things wrong.
Yeah, totally fixable.
Right. So then the question is, even a level beyond what you both just said, what is the actual specific thing are you saying to do? Assuming I understand that you'd rather test me and know exactly where the issue is, but the general advice that you give to, most people, this basic things you're saying, can we try to name the very most specific thing that I should do? Should I wake up at 6 a.m.? Should I fast? Should I exercise? What is, the most specific thing that applies to almost everyone, even if we don't have it? We want to take if we wanted to take the most preventative action we can, whether or not we are, whatever stage we're at.
So let me tell you two things then, okay?
Okay.
Number one, go on your computer and type in my cognoscopy and get a cognoscopy. That's the number one. And then the second, and that will basically give you all the results you need. And you don't even need a doctor to do that. You can get the tests. It's very easy to do. Now, the second thing is there are 7 basics: nutrition, exercise, sleep, stress, brain training, detox, and some targeted supplements.
Say that slower again. Nutrition.
Okay. 7 things. So nutrition, we'll go through each one quickly. Nutrition, what it's called KetoFlex 12-3. It is a plant-rich, mildly ketogenic diet, high in fiber, high in phytonutrients. And by the way, you can now get it. You can literally get it from Nutrition for Longevity. They've just actually produced this. So you can actually have them send some to your home. It's easy, it's inexpensive, and you can see what they've actually put in it. It is a plant-rich, mildly ketogenic diet. So that's diet. Exercise, you want both aerobic and strength training. It improves everything from blood flow to improving your insulin sensitivity, et cetera. Sleep, and we're hearing about sleep before. Okay, sleep's huge. And you want to get 7 to 8 hours of restorative sleep check your oxygenation during the sleep. You can do it with an Oura Ring or an Apple Watch, or you can do it by getting an oximeter or borrowing one from your physician. It's very easy. Or do a sleep study, any of those. Make sure your oxygen is sitting up where it should be, which is in the mid to high 90s. And then stress. As long as you've got a lot of stress going on, your amygdala is firing, you're recognizing that stress. And part of what Alzheimer's is all about is a protective downsizing mode of your brain. It's very much like what happened to our country when we had COVID-19. Everyone's pulling back. That's what your brain is doing when it has these insults. And that's what Alzheimer's is the result of. And then brain training, I mentioned Brain HQ is an excellent one. They've published the most on what actually helps. And then detox, and there's some basic detox that everyone can do, from filtered water to sweating to making sure your glutathione level is normal, things like that. And then the final thing is some targeted supplements. And that depends a little bit on where you stand, but excellent ones are things like omega-3s, resolvins, whole coffee fruit extract. Those are some of my favorites. The bottom line here is that the armamentarium is huge for cognitive decline. We should not be getting cognitive decline. People wait too long and do too little, and that's why we have the problem. Alzheimer's right now is set to absolutely dwarf the pandemic. We had 1 million people die, just over 1 million people die in the United States from the pandemic. Of the currently living Americans, the statistics say that about 45 million of us will die of Alzheimer's unless we do something about it. Well, there's a tremendous amount you can do about it today.
Michael, what would you add to this list? We said getting my cognoscopy, nutrition, exercise, sleep, lowering stress, brain training, detox, glutathione levels, targeted supplements like omega-3. What else is on your focus list, or should we just add to do the still point and the cranial pumping?
Yeah, which is what I was going to say. Obviously, cranial sacral therapy, because part of the reason why is that what we found is that it not only affects the brain when we do craniosacral therapy, but the body. And because you're getting more flow and more opening up of the connective tissue structure, muscular structure, lymphatic structure, and all the basic body structures, then what it means is that you're getting better metabolic uptake for everything that you're changing. So with nutrition. So when I talk about the body energy longevity prescription, similar to what Dale said, it's what we're doing is we're looking at exercise, we're looking at diet, looking at craniosacral therapy, and then supplements. And, as he pointed out, different people have a different physiology. Some people can get away with a lot, and other people not so much. Some people have a genetic factor, right? So you need to bracket that. Some people have had more insults to the body. They've had more close-hit injuries. They've had that. So those are all factors that when you want to sort it out, you need to look at the specifics as well. But in general, that's what we're saying. But again, it's really the idea you want to look at the whole spectrum of where somebody is and start to target in, which is what we do clinically with our work too. We're kind of like listening to the body, complementary to doing any of these other analyses that we're doing. We're listening to the body and feeling like, well, here are restriction patterns. What's the history? Has there been an immune system insult, which we deal with as well? Has there been other factors? What's happening in the gut? That's kind of like what we're after and what we're doing. So I'm just adding to that. It's just a little bit of a different angle of really the same approach. And sleep, for example, if I could say, is just really an important piece just in that. I think it was University of Boston or Boston University a couple of years ago. They did a scan they provided, and they showed that there's a flow of blood, and then during sleep, it invites a wave of cerebral spinal fluid to be invited in. It's as if about 60% of the clearance of toxins from the brain occur during sleep in the lymphatic system. And craniosacral therapy helps to kind of help set up that sleep, make it more profound, and even make that exchange deeper. So it's very interesting that it's a way to complement sleep as well, which is very important, as Dale said, to kind of include in that cleansing process.
The speaker before you, Steve Hendricks, went beyond the Keto Flex 12-3. He said, ideally, narrow your eating window to 8 hours, and in a perfect world to 6 hours. Do you believe that would be beneficial?
In some people, that can be harmful, and in some people can be beneficial. So here's the trick. So we recommend 12 to 16 hours of fasting at night. So I think we agree on pretty much on the time window. The issue here is that some of the people who have cognitive decline, as you know, can be frail. And so the people who are at BMIs of 22 or more, I have no problem with that. But we have people that will come in with a BMI of 18. So they'll be underweight, and then you try to now stack a long fast on them, they actually get worse, and we've seen this happen. So you want to kind of judge depending on whether you've got fat to burn. You have to remember that what happens is your brain can only burn one of two things. And when we see, Alzheimer's disease or the beginning of Alzheimer's, this is a network insufficiency. We're not supporting. There's too much inflammation, too little energetics. So we're not supporting this extensive network of 500 trillion synapses enough, and it is protecting itself and it is downsizing. So normally you are metabolizing glucose or you're metabolizing ketones, and you should be able to go back and forth. That's called metabolic flexibility. However, as we get a little older, many people lose both of those. They can no longer metabolize the glucose the way they could before because they have insulin resistance. And by the way, that is the signature of Alzheimer's on a PET scan. Reduced glucose utilization in the brain in the temporal and parietal regions, as well as the precuneus and the posterior cingulate. But these are the main areas here that are reduced. So you have to be very careful. You've now got ketones that'll back that up. You've lost the glucose. Well, the problem is you're not making the ketones, again, because of the insulin resistance. Your high insulin levels prevent you from making those ketones. So when we see people with cognitive decline, that is an energetic emergency. we need to restore their insulin sensitivity, which is, by the way, why the fasting, that's helpful for that. But it's why you have to be careful if you start with fasting or you do too much fasting. And then we have to restore the ability to make and use ketones. So this is why at the beginning, we tend to give people exogenous ketones just to give them some form of energy. And then over time, we can get them into ketogenesis. So you just have to be careful if you have these long fasts. As long as someone's got fat to burn and they are able to make ketones, hallelujah. But for many people, they're not.
Okay, I'm going to come back to diet, but as far as brain training, what exactly are you all recommending for stimulation? Should we read? Should we do puzzles? Should we play, do dance and ping pong? Should we avoid TV? Is this fluffy science or is this serious science? What is the reality about mental stimulation and where we get it from?
That's a good point because, in fact, both of these things are really helpful. So there's no question, no matter how skeptical you are, that people who have included some form of brain stimulation, now, that's not to say you forget the biochemistry. You know, you're improving your methylation, you're improving your inflammation, all these things. But then having some form of stimulation is helpful. They get the best outcomes when you include that. Now, there are two general types. You mentioned both. So one of them here is going to be things like brain training. And yes, you're ping pong, great. Learning to do some dances, great. Any of these things, anything that's a stimulation, you don't want to have a lot of stress because stress by itself is a problem. So enjoy it, find something you love, Sudoku, Brain HQ, whatever it is that you like. Separately, you can find some stimulation through photobiomodulation. That's a big one. Some people like to use magnetic resonance stimulation, transcranial, any of these things, mild stimulation. And there are a number of good photobiomodulation groups out there that will actually give you some stimulation. And this does seem to give better outcomes. So those two things together can be very helpful.
Michael, what kind of results have you seen with your people who have taken the cranial sacral seriously and followed up and kept doing it? Is this something that you've consistently seen good results, and how powerful is it? In other words, for people, they've got to decide how to spend their time. And if people say, I'm going to take this 2-day training, how good have the results been and how often does it happen?
Well, let me go back a little bit to where our beginning was, okay? Back in, I think we've been at this now 15 or 20 years. In our initial study in a nursing home, we published the results in 2008 in the American Journal of Gerontological Nursing. And just as a bit of a background, and we looked for 6 weeks by doing this cranial sacral still point once a day for 15 or 20 minutes. And after about 3 weeks into the 6-week study, we begin to actually see some change. We began to actually see that people started to recognize their caregivers. One of the biggest results we found is that we saw a decrease in agitation. And we used something called the Cohen-Mansfield Agitation Study, which actually shows that we're lowering sympathetic tone. We just mentioned about stress. Well, if you can lower the stress level in any way, shape, or form, that's pretty significant. And that's part of what the cranial seems to show that it does. So we did that. And then we saw that even we started to see changes in activities of daily living, that people were starting to be able to take care of themselves. Now, that was an initial baseline. That's very, very minimal. But even with that, over the 6-week period, we saw clinical and statistical significance that was continuing. And then anecdotally, for the last decade or so, we've tested this on hundreds of people and had people go through this protocol. And basically what they found is that they, at the very least, don't get any worse. They may not get better, but they don't get any worse. And we've seen that in a lot of cases, people don't end up in nursing homes because it kind of like stopped them at that area. So that's one thing. And then what we started to do is create advanced techniques and intensive programs that we have so we can get in and look at prior insults to the body that may have been, decades in the moving. We found that It's not like one day somebody wakes up with Alzheimer's like you have the flu or something. Something has been brewing in the body, often metabolically, and very often it's an inflammatory response, what I call a lot of the diseases of aging that have been going on for decades, maybe before they get an official diagnosis. So our idea in terms of prevention is that if we can come in and stop that before it gets to the point where it's at what I would call it early, even to the mid stage, which often is a lot worse than people think it is by the time we see them, that we can actually change the trajectory of the disease process. So it's a measure of frequency and intensity. The more we can do it, the more consistently we can see the result. But in a large variety of cases, we've seen, people get result. And what's required, though, is that there's consistency of treatment to get the best results.
Can we get that video ready that we made from the other day? I want to show that when it's ready.
Yeah, I'll take care of that. Yep.
Okay. Is Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes, is that an accurate term or is that not accurate?
I would say, functional medicine talks, Mark Hyman's been talking about that for years, that when you talk, at least in a certain variety of cases, it's inflammatory and you have problems in the body. That simply put, there's inflammation in the body, and then eventually that overflows into the brain. So that's a popular way to put it. And there's a lot of tracking. If you just go into a nursing home and do a random survey and ask how many people that have been diagnosed have diabetes, a large percent of them will say, they've had that, not surprisingly. So go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that it is a common risk factor, and it's been well described that diabetes is about doubles your risk for Alzheimer's, and metabolic syndrome increases it even more. But it's not the whole story. So as I mentioned earlier, I mean, this is really about inflammation. It's about activation of your innate immune system. It's especially the innate immune system's memory, which lives at 3 different sites, which lives in the endothelial cells, in the bone marrow, and then in the tissue macrophages, which in the brain are the microglia. And these are no question affected in Alzheimer's disease. It's essentially instead of type 3 diabetes, I would call it a chronic innate encephalitis. There is inflammation, it's chronic, and it affects your brain for decades. So that's part of the story, type 3 diabetes, but by no means is it the whole story.
Okay, I want to show you a video that Dr. Gabriel Cousens gave the other day. We have 80 speakers at this conference, a lot of passionate, smart, educated people, but they don't all say the same thing. Gabriel Cousens said something very different than many of the whole food plant-based speakers that we have. He eats a whole food plant-based diet, but he had some different conclusions that were in contrast to the things that many of our speakers are saying. I want to show you some highlights of what he said and then ask for your feedback.
And a high carbohydrate diet. So when Joe Furman talks about, he sees a lot of people with vegans with brain degeneration. I look at the high carbohydrate diet, which I don't support because it stimulates brain inflammatory pathways. Now, to me, this is a really important study, Journal of Alzheimer's 2012. I'm just going to read it because it's so important. Older people, and we're talking people above 60, eating a high carbohydrate diet. Get the word high carbohydrate because we're told a lot in the vegan world that you want a high complex carbohydrate diet. People are talking about 70% carbohydrate. Yeah, well, here's the result. Have nearly 4 times the risk of developing mild cognitive impairment. So this is what David Perlmutter in his book, Grain Brain, I thought he did really good work. A diet heavy in inflammatory carbohydrates, which mostly they are, low in healthy fats, messes with the mind in more ways than one. But let's say messes with the brain in more ways than one. So Fat is the preferred fuel of human metabolism, and it's been that way through evolution until we started farming about 10,000 years ago. Next. And this is one of the second reasons I think that vegans tend to get more Alzheimer's, because people with the highest cholesterol scored higher on cognitive tests than those with lower cholesterol levels. So this is my cerebrospinal fluid. That is really important. As 2007 study showed that people who regularly consumed omega-3, this is one of the supplements I'm going to talk about, they were 60% less likely to develop dementia than those who didn't regularly consume such oils. That's DHA and EPA. High cholesterol is associated with better memory function. And it's the preferred fuel for your heart. I mentioned the, so atrial fibrillation, high omega-3, 85% lower risk of dying from all causes.
Okay, anything you want to, or please comment on that if you could.
Yeah, it fits exactly with everything I've said. Exactly. So what we've said is it's about inflammation, which is lowered by things like omega-3s and which is increased by carbohydrates. KetoFlex 12-3 is a high good fats, high phytonutrients, high fiber, mildly ketogenic diet. So it fits perfectly. Now, the cholesterol part, yeah, interesting, but it depends. I mean, the cholesterol is got many different forms we're talking about here. So for people who have very high, for example, ApoB, for people who have very high LDL particle numbers, that's associated with strokes and associated with cognitive decline. On the other hand, having a normal or even high cholesterol with good fats, with where you've got reasonable LDL particle numbers, appropriate ApoB, then they tend to do better. So everything that he said is exactly in line with what we've published. And I would also say, anyone, for any opinion, take patients, treat them, do a trial, publish your data so that everybody can see it. We've done that, and we've shown that 84% in our studies actually got better. So that's, that's the acid test. Can you actually make people better with what you're doing? There are lots of claims out there, all sorts of things. But just as Michael was saying a few minutes ago, they published their results. It shows there was improvement. So that's the acid test you got to show. So yeah, I mean, everything that was said there fits very well with what we're doing. And KetoFlex is a mostly good fats diet.
So when you say good fats, does that mean seeds, nuts, olives, avocados?
Yes, monounsaturates and polyunsaturates. And so things like, omega-3s, and as I say, monounsaturates, yes, seeds, nuts, things like that. You don't want to have so many nuts that you end up with a high omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. You want to keep your ratio, 1-to-1 up to 4-to-1 or so. You don't want to be sitting up at 15-to-1, which is the standard American diet ratio. But having nuts, having seeds, these are all appropriate.
And what about oil?
Yeah, now of course, there's some controversy. And, you mentioned that there are differences of opinion. Of course there are. This is a complex subject. And, this is one of the things that shows us we're all making progress because there is disagreement about exactly how to do it. But so the people who don't like oils say, look, oils are a processed food. That is true. But cold pressed oils, minimally processed, and they are, no question, can be very helpful. And again, go back to things like, and can be very helpful. And again, go back to things like omega-3s. And I would also mention things like the resolvins. Professor Charles Sirhan at Harvard has done such beautiful work over the years on discovering resolvins and characterizing them. And, if you take high amounts of omega-3s, you're going to produce some resolvins. So they're good for preventing inflammation. They're also good for resolving inflammation. They're also good for structure of membranes. All of these things can be helpful.
And what about beans and whole grains like quinoa, millet, amaranth, teff, buckwheat, wild rice?
Yeah. So those, well, the ones you've mentioned are actually better than others. But in general, what we avoid are, number one, simple carbs, of course. I think everyone agrees with that. And then gluten and other grains because of the issue of leaky gut. So we do avoid gluten, and we do tend to avoid other grains. And I know that is another area of controversy. Many people say, well, whole grains are good. We tend to get better results when we avoid the whole grains. And then dairy. Dairy is inflammatory. And so we avoid dairy as well. And then the last would be, and only if you're having trouble with them, would be lectins. And certainly Dr. Stephen Gundry has written a book about lectins. Only for those who have big issues with autoimmune disease are we concerned about lectins. But he's certainly made a strong case for avoiding those as well. So we end up, with a diet that avoids those major groups and focuses on a high-fat, mildly ketogenic, plant-rich, mildly ketogenic diet.
Yeah, and I would just say too that in terms of fats, sometimes it gets conflated. It's the type of fats because they can be a good delivery system, but you just have to be careful. Like the omegas are good. A lot of people have had, I've found myself, people have had really good results with that.
Yeah.
Quentin Uber, who's going to speak at our conference, says the best thing for inflammation is grounding, which means walking barefoot on the grass, in the sand, in the ocean. Should we all walk around for 2 hours every day barefoot on the grass to fight inflammation? Or is this just a mild thing that it's not going to make that big a difference either way?
Well, I think you'd have to ask him about all the data on grounding. But I think it's fantastic to get out there in your bare feet and spend some time. However, there are many other things that are anti-inflammatory as well, beginning with your diet and including your lifestyle and including things like curcumin and propolis and omega-3s. All of these things, there's so much for anti-inflammation. Ginger is another good one. Just the foods that you're eating can be so helpful. So I think inflammation is something that I think we can all do very, very well with. The critical piece, and which people don't talk about nearly enough, is that you need to understand what's causing the inflammation. So you buy yourself some time by starting anti-inflammatories and resolving inflammation. But whatever it is that's causing it's causing that inflammation, you've got to identify it and remove it. It may be that you have chronic tick-borne illness like Lyme disease or Ehrlichia or Babesia or one of those. It may be that you've got some candida, or you've got a leaky gut, or you've got a poor oral microbiome, herpes simplex. I mean, on and on and on. There are many reasons to have chronic inflammation. And this idea of, well, we're just going to take an anti-inflammatory, that is a short-term solution. You need then to follow that up with finding what's causing it and getting rid of it.
So how does someone get rid of inflammation? Just with lifestyle?
Well, no, that's the whole point. You need to find out what's causing, so inflammation is normal when your body is responding. You have a two-part response. You have your immune system has the innate part of the immune system, which is what creates the inflammation. It's basically telling you, okay, Stephen, something's wrong. Things are bad. We're going to activate this whole pathway, just like you do with COVID-19. And unfortunately, there are a lot of parallels between COVID-19 and Alzheimer's. So we're very concerned about people. We already know there's been a publication showing people who had COVID-19 are at increased risk for Alzheimer's disease. So again, please, everybody, get a cognoscopy, get on active prevention. Don't wait. And then the second part is it hands it off to a much more specific, the adaptive immune system, which is your T cells and B cells and your antibodies and things like that. So getting rid of the inflammation is getting rid of a normal response of your body to something. So yes, the inflammation is producing symptoms and increasing your likelihood for heart disease and for cancers and for neurodegeneration, but it's there for a reason. So you need to find out if you have specific infections, if you've changed your oral microbiome, what is it? And then you need to address that. It may be that you have to take acyclovir for a few months. It may be that you have to take some antibiotics to get, or herbal approaches to get rid of Lyme disease. There are all sorts of causes of it. So it's not enough just to address the inflammation. You have to address what causes it.
And Stephen, if I can piggyback on that, one of the things that osteopathy really looks at in cranial is that when you're actually looking and listening to the body, you can kind of tell from different sites a little bit of the entry point. So as I say to many of my students, we're not just chasing the symptoms, we're looking for the generator at a deep level, what's in the body. And complementary to all this testing is we're looking to see what the restriction patterns are that are already existing in the brain. So I agree that what we want to do is look at whether it's the vector, whether it's external from some car accident or blow to the body. It may be something that's inflammatory because of food. It may be something that's throwing things off hormonally. It could even be toxicity from somebody who's imbibed, whether they know it or not, some trace amounts of mercury or cadmium or aluminum or like that. So those are all factors you want to look at to see what exactly is the vector of that. And I just want to mention one thing, if I could, Stephen. There's some new research that came out from the University of Rochester just this year in January, and they found a new layer in the brain anatomically, and it's called the SLYM layer, or it's called subarachnoid-like lymphatic membrane. And it's a layer that's only about a few molecules thick. It's in between the subarachnoid space, which in cranial sacral is an area where we're really looking to see if we can find a flow in cerebral spinal fluid. And what's interesting in my model, which talks about inflammation and a lowered flow of cerebral spinal fluid, is that if we can actually affect that layer seems to defend the immune system from having invaders cross and causing neuroinflammation. So it's a new area that's been discovered, which is kind of the area we've been treating for some time. And I think that might have to do with a lot of results that we're finding. So yeah, mediation of immune system processes could end up in the brain being compromised, but then we want to go backwards and find out what's the origin of the dysfunction in the first place. So sorry, I just wanted to jump in there and mention that as well.
And if I could piggyback on that, so we are talking about a response that we as organisms make to these different insults. This is the bottom line. It's about the insult and the response to it. So let's take a specific example. You've probably seen in the last few months, it was shown that Epstein-Barr virus is a common cause of multiple sclerosis. And in fact, about 94% of people have been exposed. So a lot of us have Epstein-Barr virus. It's very common. Anyone who had mononucleosis, for example. So you take 1,000 people, let's take 1,000 people at random. 940 of them will have been exposed to Epstein-Barr virus. 1 out of 1,000 will develop MS. So what we need to understand is, yes, Epstein-Barr is clearly important, but what was different about that one person's response than the other 939 that got it but didn't develop MS? Well, the numbers are a bit different with Alzheimer's, but it's the same idea. You take a same 1,000 people, about 150 of them are going to get Alzheimer's. Unfortunately, it's much more common than MS. But there are different insults that are associated and your response to those insults. So there will be some people who are going to get, for example, leaky gut, but will never get Alzheimer's. Some people that'll get changes in their oral microbiome, but never get Alzheimer's. But for those 150 people, it is the insults, the response to them. And you're kind of alluding to earlier. So what do we do about this? Well, these responses have to do with your genetics. If you are ApoE4 positive, you make a higher response, which is great for if you're living in a third world country. You can, eat meat full of microbes. You can have all sorts of, you can get, you can puncture your feet. You can do all sorts of things and you'll fight off the problem because you have this hyper-inflammatory response. But over your lifetime, this contributes to cardiovascular disease, slightly shorter lifespan, and a markedly increased risk for Alzheimer's disease. So everybody should find out what their genetic status is, and again, get on active prevention. So these different insults it's the response to those. So yes, we want to dampen the response, but we also want to remove the ongoing insults.
And if I can comment on that just a bit, it's like when we look at genetics and we look, some people have one copy of the gene, some have two, some have three. It puts people at greater risk. I think even Dale Perlmutter has one copy, I think he said. But the idea is the more you can mediate that, you just have to be more cautious and more careful.
Yes.
And that's the idea. So if you can find out what the precursors are, what's causing a problem, then you can kind of mediate that. It doesn't mean that a death sentence just because you have the gene, but you have to be more careful because the immune system is going to be less responsive if there's those kind of insults. And one other thing I'll just mention, at a recent conference at the Upledger Institute, we had Stephen Porges, who's kind of developed polyvagal theory over the years. And he talked about the ventral and dorsal part of the brainstem, how it affects the rest of the body, what that is in terms of brain response, and how we can mediate that with various therapies. And that's a key physiologically. We can do with manual therapy something to actually lower that stress level and that response, which is automatic, that stress response, and break up that pattern. So it's all very intertwined in terms of the way our basic physiology and genetics responds to these kind of challenges.
And if I could just add the number of people in the United States, because it's important for people to understand, this is not an uncommon problem. So you mentioned 0 copies, that's 3/4 of the population. So for example, I checked my own, I'm an ApoE33, which is just the most common. So my genetic risk for my lifetime is about 9%. It's not 0, but it's not too high. If you have a single copy of ApoE43, that's 75 million Americans, and most unfortunately don't know about it. Your lifetime risk is right around 30%. And if you have 2 copies, that's about 7 million Americans, your lifetime risk is about 70%. It's fairly high. So everyone should get on active prevention. As Michael said, that doesn't mean you're going to get it. There's a lot you can do, and there's a wonderful website called apoe4.info that was founded by Julie G., who herself has 2 copies of ApoE4 and actually had some cognitive decline and is doing well now, 11 years into treatment, still doing very, very well. So there's a tremendous amount you can do about it. Everybody should know their status. Everybody should get on active prevention.
What about nutritional supplements? Brian Clement always says that everyone should take B12. That's very important for memory. Other people have said take DHA, EPA. Do you have nutritional supplement recommendations?
Absolutely. And it depends. You want to optimize your biochemistry. So if your B12 is 1200, I don't think you need B12. If your B12 is 200, you 100% need B12, or you could die from pernicious anemia. So it depends a little bit on what your levels are. But yeah, some of the ones I tend to like, the methyl Bs, things like methylated B12 and folate, P5P. I like whole coffee fruit extract because of its increase in brain-derived neurotrophic factor. I like magnesium. Most Americans are deficient in iodine, in zinc, in magnesium, in potassium, in choline. So I like all of those. Many of us not getting enough choline in our diets. So all of these things are critical. And by the way, choline is a precursor for acetylcholine, which is important for memory and which is low in Alzheimer's disease. So those are some of the supplements that I like. And then, of course, vitamin D. Many of us are deficient in vitamin D, and that's all been shown many, many times. Low vitamin D is associated with increased risk for cognitive decline. So all of those, I think, are very, very important.
And Stephen, one other point, you look at all these disparate things, they're like all factors that can contribute. Fair enough, right? But then you kind of want to look at the underlying physiology and how it's supported. Like one of the things that manual therapy technique like craniosacral does, and this may seem a bit non-medical and non-scientific, but it allows people to kind of tune in more to their inner wisdom, or what my mentor, Dr. Upledger, called their inner physician, like recruiting and giving them the intuition to kind of find a way to optimize their health and their longevity. And in a way, I think what we're both saying is that really what we want to do is stack the cards as much in someone's favor as possible and use all the modalities that are going to really put people in a position where they can maintain their health and prevention, which is the key thing. If you can work on prevention first without things developing to a more extreme stage, that's so much the better. And with a number of people that Dale mentioned in the US population that have even one copy of this disease, that's tens of millions of people.
Yeah.
You know, and Ken Duckwald, who was one of the speakers at American Society of Aging, you know, he mentioned that by 2030, something like at least 1 in 5 of the US population will be 65 years or over. Like, it's a significant part of the population. So what do you do when you have that many millions of people? And like Dale said, it's like COVID gave us a little bit of a preview of what happens when the hospitals are overwhelmed in a very short time frame, over weeks or months. But think of what's going to happen over decades when a large amount of the population may be in advanced stages. Like, what does that, you know, suggest to the medical community and the economics of the situation? It's like something has to be done different to get the word out to support people.
Yeah.
Rita, would you like to ask a question, or where are you from?
Yes, yes, Stephen, thank you. Could you hear me?
Yes.
I'm Rita Batija, a functional medicine practitioner from the Baldwin Harbor, Long Island, New York. Dr. Bredesen, I really admire your work, and I'm so happy that you are opening up and people are listening from you the importance of the fat, which is there is a stigma that go for low fat, low fat, low fat, which is not important. I have a question for you. For the maintenance basis, the organic MCT oil, at least 1 tablespoon a day, should be taken with omega-3 fatty acids, EPA, DHA, so focusing on the DHA or the EPA. And the third one is a phosphatidylcholine complex, especially for the brain. So if you can comment on that, would appreciate.
Well, you know, I would agree. I mean, basically, the one issue with MCT oil, you have to be careful. As you know, some people with either MCT oil or coconut oil will run up their LDL particle numbers. So unfortunately, they can have too much of the small, dense LDL, the oxidized LDL, that can be atherogenic. So at the same time, it can be very helpful in terms of helping people to get into ketosis. So one of the things that I like that Dr. Anne Hathaway has done is to suggest that people combine that. So you have some MCT oil, and you mentioned a tablespoon. That's a very reasonable amount. Some people take a tablespoon 3 times a day. You can go by, you know, where you stand with your ketone level. You want to get that ketone level up to 1.0 to 4.0, anywhere in there. As long as you can get it above 1.0 millimolar BHB at least once per day, or if you prefer to look at acetone using a breathalyzer, you need to get it up to about 10 ACEs per day, sometime during the day. Then you're going to be doing the right thing. And so combine that, but make sure that you don't have a high LDL particle number. And especially if you are ApoE4 positive, especially if you have known cardiovascular disease, be careful. Don't give yourself atherogenic particles, because that can hurt you in the long run. Completely agree with you about EPA and DHA. And people, you know, we're starting our next trial now. And what people are typically using 1 to 2 grams of EPA and DHA per day. And then phosphatidylcholine, absolutely, for multiple reasons. So all of those things are very appropriate.
Rena, would you like to ask a question, or where are you from?
Yes, hi. From New York, Dr. Bredesen. You mentioned herpes simplex. I know someone very close to me that has it, but they're taking acyclovir every day and may get an outbreak maybe once every 2 years. Is that person's risk for Alzheimer the same? And also, do you believe in eating meat as part of your fat in your diet?
Yeah, good points. So herpes and fat, meat. So first of all, there was a wonderful study out of Taiwan showing that people who at midlife were treating their herpes outbreaks on their lip And I should say HSV1, but also HHV6A is another one that they found in the brain, which is a different type of herpes. But the people who are treating their outbreaks had a dramatically lower level of developing dementia. It was more than 50% reduction. So I really believe in that. Now, the person you're talking about, it sounds like they're treating it, which is great, and they're suppressing it most of the time. So they are likely to be reducing their risk, again, based on the Taiwan study, which was an excellent study. With respect to meat, yes, this is part of, so the diet that we use is called KetoFlex 12-3. As I mentioned earlier, you can now get it for nutrition from Nutrition for Longevity. They'll deliver it to you. I've eaten it. I've had what they made. I was very impressed with what they were able to do. This is the group that was started by Walter Longo and his colleagues. And I think they've done some very nice work. So yes, absolutely. And you know, when I say meat, I'm talking about wild caught fish, not farm fish, you know, wild caught seafood. I'm talking about some grass-fed beef, fine. And I'm talking about some pastured chicken, not, you know, horrible chicken, not, you know, bad beef that's not grass, all of these sorts of things that can actually be quite toxic. So I'm talking about the ones that are actually, you know, in general good for you. Now, I really, you know, I recognize there's a huge ongoing issue. We have people who are completely 100% carnivorous and are, you know, want to have all the various organs, et cetera. And we have people that are completely 100% vegan. And then we have everything in between. We're simply looking at what has given the best outcomes for cognitive decline. And it is the KetoFlex 12-3 approach. The issue I have with some of these others, like Mediterranean diet, that's fine, except that they don't get you into ketosis. And ketosis is one of the more important things to be able to supply your neurons and your synapses. So yes, absolutely. You don't want to, for that diet, you know, it's a plant-rich, mildly ketogenic diet. So you don't want to be making the plate, you know, mostly meat. I'm sure you've seen the pictures, and we've got pictures of KetoFlex 12-3. You've got a little piece of fish or chicken or beef, and then you've got a lot of salad and vegetables. That's kind of the way it should look.
Okay.
Thank you.
Rochelle, would you like to ask a question, and where are you from?
Yes. Hi, Stephen. I'm from Long Beach, New York, and my name is Rochelle. My question is, my dad had dementia, and I was always wondering, he had a very poor diet. He drank a lot of coffee and put sweet and low in it. You know, he's a very stubborn man. I couldn't change his diet, junk food diet. I'm wondering if that accelerated his dementia. And my other question is also on the vaccination for COVID, if there's any connection to getting dementia or Alzheimer's.
Yeah, great points both. And no question, poor diets accelerate your risk for dementia and can accelerate your dementia, especially high sugar, high carbohydrate, pro-inflammatory diets that produce insulin resistance. So no question. And this is why getting, you know, the right nutrition is part of those 7 basics that I mentioned earlier. And then with respect to COVID, yeah, this is such an important point because, as you know, there, again, huge controversy. Should you have vaccination? Should you not have vaccination? Well, I wish people would quit thinking that it's 100% zero. It's black and white. It's not black and white. You know, one is better for the society as a whole. You know, you decrease the risk. On the other hand, no question, there are people who have had issues when they've gotten vaccinated with things like myocarditis. You can't deny that. There are people who've had, from the J&J one, of course, superior sagittal sinus thrombosis and died from it. So there's no perfect answer here, but anything that is triggering ongoing inflammation, and that includes boosters, includes exposures to these various toxins and things, it includes various infections, will increase your risk for developing Alzheimer's disease.
Okay, thank you. Let me just throw one quick thing in. I just once heard this from David Wolf, that people on lower floors, like if you're standing on your basement versus standing on the 18th floor of a building, that somehow there's some kind of benefit. Does that resonate with you in any way?
Well, so what's been published is actually the carbon dioxide in where you work. So what they are showing is it's really about how good is the ventilation The ventilation, as it goes down and your carbon dioxide goes up, they show very nicely that your cognition slows. So for all of us, we want to be in places that have good ventilation. And it's been surprising how bad the ventilation can be, and people won't really think that they notice it, but they are functioning less well. Now, as far as being on lower floors, something, unrelated to that, I don't know. I don't know these data. I haven't seen this paper. So maybe you could give more details. What was it about being on lower floors?
I don't have enough information. I don't remember.
Yeah.
Okay. Lori, would you like to ask a question? And where are you from? Lori?
Yes, I'm from New Jersey, and I would like to maybe try to ask a question.
Sure.
It's a little different, but maybe you would know because Michael had said a little bit about this cranial sacral sort of thing. Unfortunately, I know a relative that during the pandemic, unfortunately, was diagnosed with something rare called PRE. Unfortunately, there was a syrinx too, so the cerebral spinal fluid was not moving. Had neurosurgery, and because of what's going in New York, I was afraid to go in there. But anyway, I wondered if there's anything that either Dr. Bredesen or Michael knows about helping that problem with some kind of cranial help.
I think you're mentioning PRA malformation, which is kind of a contraindication, but we can treat in a very gentle way. And there's different stages of it. Some are more severe. It's kind of like where the brainstem flows down in the foramen magnum, and it can cause a problem if it slips below that aperture.
Yes.
So there's a way that if someone's advanced, can treat it in a very gentle way, but we have to be very aggressive, very careful about that and not be too aggressive when we're treating. But it's something to look at to see if we can address it structurally as well, because certainly in their case, that may have exacerbated their problems as well. Certainly when you have lower flow of cerebral spinal fluid, which is something we've looked at quite a bit, that's not a good thing, obviously. You want more flow. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. Yes. And Dr. Bredesen, do you know anything about that problem?
Yeah, I mean, Arnold Chiari is a relatively well-known, and there are neurosurgical approaches to it as well. And as you mentioned, it can be associated with syringomyelia.
Right.
So I might hope this person has seen both a craniosacral person and also a neurosurgeon to get multiple opinions to see what's going to be the best way to treat this.
Well, the surgery was done with a neurosurgeon, but we kind of left up in the air as to what to do after that. And so
Okay.
it's been quite frustrating. So,
I'm sorry to hear that.
I don't know. Yeah. And unfortunately, when she was young, she had chronic ear infections. So I have to live with that. I was told to give her polymyxin, which is ototoxic. So she does sign language now too. It's just that it's hard.
Right.
And I don't know if you know of anybody in the New Jersey area or that might be able to help.
I don't know any specialists on this particular area in New Jersey. No, I'm out here in California, so I don't know too many doctors in New Jersey.
I see. Okay. I know.
Even
that-
if you want to put me in touch with her later, I can give her some referrals for some cranial people in New Jersey if she likes.
Okay, Lori, you can email us at info@realtruthtalks.com, and we'll put you in touch with Michael Morgan, okay?
Okay, info at Real Truths.
Info@realtruthtalks.com, or just go to our website to contact and just say that you called in during the conference and would like to get in touch with Michael Morgan.
Okay, I certainly appreciate you're reaching out that way, and I'm enjoying all the lectures too, learning so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Elizabeth, would you like to ask a question, and where are you from?
Yes, Elizabeth Stumpf from Quebec, Canada. I'm a family physician, actually. So I had a few questions. I'll ask two, and if you have time, maybe I can ask two more to go back in line. So first one, I was wondering if lecithin was a good choline supplement or good for choline supplement. And the second one is for a person who has a normal MoCA, score of 30 and you wanted to have a better sensitive evaluation with the CNS vital signs, can that be done online actually by the person, or do you have to order the test, or does the physician has to pay a fee for that? How does it work? Because I looked online and it wasn't clear for me how to use it.
Yeah, good point. So first of all, lecithin's excellent. Yeah, it's one. Just be careful about the total amount of choline you're getting in the lecithin. And as far as CNS vital signs, yes, it's typically ordered by the physician. But there are all sorts of, you don't even have to do that one. If you don't, want to do that, there's Brain Check, there's Cambridge Neuroscience. There are all sorts of ways to go. There's also the SLUMS, St. Louis, all that. St. Louis University one, but although that's very similar to MOCA. Great to hear that you have a score of 30 on your MOCA. That's excellent. But you're absolutely right. It's helpful to have more sensitive ones. One thing I would recommend, the easiest one of all probably, have you done CQ test? Just look up a CQ, so C and a little Q, CQ test. And was it designed? It's a free online test. It was designed by Alan Boyd, who designed the CNS vital signs, but you don't have to worry about anyone ordering it. You just do it freely online, and it will give you a percentile for your age, so you can see where you stand. And it's much more sensitive than MOCA.
Okay, Michael, how do people stay in touch with you, follow up with you, get access to your book, to your work? What's the best way to do that?
If they want to email me, they can email me at michael.morgan@preventingalzheimers.com. So that's one way we can give them referral.
Okay, and I think if you go to our website and you go to speaker bios and you click on Michael Morgan, you will see that gives you access to his book is under the bookstore. Let me just look. If we click under your name, I just want to make sure it goes to the right source for your information. So let's see, Michael Morgan. So it goes to preventingalzheimers.com.
Right. That's the website as well. Yeah.
Okay. And that's the best way to follow up with you?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And Dr. Bredesen, if people want to learn the Bredesen protocol, your programs, your books, what's the very best way for people that want to follow up with you and get more information and learn more?
Yeah, drbredesen.com. You can do that. You can go to mycognoscopy.com. And again, I encourage everyone, get a cognoscopy, see where you stand. It's relatively easy to do. And let's make sure that you don't have to worry. The reality is that, my generation, I'm an old guy, but my generation should be the last one to worry about Alzheimer's disease. And everyone who's, in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and even 60s should not have to worry about this. Get on active prevention. Don't wait. You can also get the books. So The End of Alzheimer's Program, and The First Survivors of Alzheimer's. All books that talk about the approach that we take. And you can also take training. And that's called Recode 2.0 training for anyone who's interested in training this. And it's about 35 hours or so online training.
So the Recode protocol?
Yes. This is for the training, it's Recode 2.0.
Uh-huh. So if someone wants to, they go to our website, they click on your name, we go to the website, and I see something that says Apollo Health Reversal and Brain Optimization Recode Program, enroll now. That's not the training, that's to actually learn the techniques, or
So I'm not sure which page you're looking at, but there are pages there specifically for getting on a program yourself, and there are pages there for training, and it's pretty clear on there which one's for training and which one's for Recode. So so I'd have to look and see which one you're looking at right now.
Okay, and then this one, it says that there's a Recode program and you can get lab tests with it. And this is a way that you would work, or your team would work closely with people and help them?
Exactly. Yeah. And as I said, we've trained over 2,000 physicians from 10 different countries and all over the US. So there should be someone near you that we have trained. And you can get, with their team, with the physician, the health coaches they have, et cetera. And you can actually get the blood testing before you even go in. So you can get the blood testing on your own online. It's pretty simple to do. And it will do the various tests that your doctor is typically not doing. So it will look at the critical ones to tell you whether you're at high risk or low risk.
Okay, can we unmute everyone? I really want to thank both of you. This information is invaluable, a little scary, but invaluable. And I appreciate you giving a positive slant and giving us all hope about a subject that has been we've considered, a terrible sentence if you get it. So it's very great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to hear you. Thank you.
Thank you.